Good afternoon. Thanks so much for joining us today. I'm Adele Johnson, the Executive Director of the Black History Museum and Cultural Center of Virginia, where our mission is to preserve stories that inspire by telling the untold stories, the undertold stories, the forgotten stories about the struggles, the triumphs, and the contributions of our ancestors. And we also love highlighting and celebrating the heroes of today. You know, the Black History Museum reopened a couple of weeks ago, and all is going well. We have our COVID ID protocols in place, and so far everyone is following our guidelines as requested. And we're also limiting groups so that it's more comfortable for you to have a leisurely visit while social distancing. So come on down. Our permanent exhibition covers emancipation, Reconstruction, Jim Crow, desegregation, massive resistance, and civil rights. And our featured exhibition is The Paradox of Liberty, Slavery at Jefferson's Monticello, which has been extended until November. This exhibition focuses on the 607 enslaved children, women, and men that Thomas Jefferson owned during his lifetime. It gives voice to these enslaved people who honestly we never heard very much about until recent years, yet they were the ones that built and maintained Monticello. So come on down and visit. Read their stories. Learn about their lives through the over 300 artifacts. See the photographs and hear the oral histories told by their descendants. We are so honored to share this exhibition with you because it offers a more complete and inclusive history, not only about Virginia, but about America. And that is what the Black History Museum is all about. Today is our fourth segment of Voices for Change, a community conversation series with the overarching goal of being a catalyst for dialogue, and a catalyst for action. We want each of you to take some time to reflect on who you are, what you stand for, and what you individually, as well as all of us collectively, can do to make our country a better place for future generations. In a few minutes, you'll hear from several people sharing their personal experiences and perspectives, because we believe that each of us has a story, and that by sharing our personal stories, we will provide a deeper, more clear understanding of what the issues are that really matter. Today we are focusing on what we're calling subliminal consent. You know, there are signs and symbols around us that we see each and every day, but we see them differently because it depends on, where you grew up and what history book you were given and what teachers you had and what conversations you had at home. And honestly, we're wondering if we've become numb to what we see and hear around us. The recent protests have certainly given us pause. But have we really awakened to the point of thinking, considering, and taking action? If we see something but don't say anything or don't do anything, are we giving subliminal consent? As I say every time, we can't tell you what to do, but I wholeheartedly believe that each one of us has a role and responsibility. Social action or social justice doesn't just happen. We have to make it happen. And as John Lewis said, let's make some good trouble. So today, during the program, we also want to hear from you. We are going to pose some questions on the screen, and then your combined responses will be shown as a percentage. Please participate because we want to know what you're thinking too. Again, today's theme is subliminal consent. So let's begin.
Black memorabilia is also known as Black Americana, and these are artifacts that date back to the late 1800s. They are pretty much our remembrances of our past and the history of America. This is where we learned a lot about Black stereotypes and mamies and minstrels and blackface and false portrayals of African Americans in the United States. These artifacts were developed and used in everyday life to include advertisements and toys and food products, marketing. And what is remaining of these original artifacts, in my opinion, should be collected and preserved as they show a historical side of what was going on during times after Black people were freed. And this is during mainly the Reconstruction era as well as the Jim Crow era. I began collecting Black memorabilia about 8 years ago, and I collected my first pieces from an estate sale in Mechanicsville. I felt that the pieces were horrible, but I had to purchase them because I wanted to learn more about them. I wanted to research them. And after I did such, I began showing them to people, and it brought about an emotion like I've never seen before. But it also gave me the opportunity to talk about the history, Black history in America, and talk about, what was going on during those times during Reconstruction and Jim Crow era. And I've been collecting ever since. I have 700 pieces in my collection of Black memorabilia as well as Black artifacts. These items are subliminal messages. They're reminders of how freed slaves were kept oppressed in America. They were used to inform society that Black people were less than. And it was done in a way that was visible, that could be seen every day and during everyday life, with the ultimate goal of making sure that this oppression will be remembered for generations and generations to come.
For me, as a unfortunately older white person in Richmond, there are different kinds of racially derogatory symbols that I see and I don't see. There are those that I see because they're obvious to me through my life experience, like the Confederate flag or a school named after Robert E. Lee and Jefferson Davis. And then, based on my life experiences, there have been symbols and monuments that I haven't seen, that I didn't realize, and I'm not happy about this, but I didn't realize were as offensive as they are to my Black friends, my Black co-workers, my fellow Richmond citizens. And over these past few months, it has been an opportunity to gain empathy and to understand that there are a lot of things out there that were put out there to be offensive that I never realized just because it just wasn't something I could see. And I'm beginning to see more of that now. When we don't address these symbols, we allow them to continue. We allow that subliminal statement, that dog whistle, that message to Black Americans to continue. And as we become aware of them, as white people like me become aware of them, we need to stand up and support the removal of them, the recontextualization of them. They can't be allowed, these symbols, to be maintained in public squares where they are intended to intimidate my Black friends and coworkers, citizens of the city. It wasn't until we saw the statues recontextualized and I began to grasp the rage that I really also began to understand what these Confederate statues were meant to be. Honestly, I do believe there are people who've looked at them as celebrations of their ancestors and, their forebears. But they were doing this recognition by also turning a blind eye to the horror of the cause that their ancestors fought for and by glorifying it. But there was also another reason these statues were put up. And it wasn't a subliminal message. It was a very overt message. And the message to Black Richmonders was, your dead emancipator can't help you now. The culture that enslaved your great-great-grandparents, the culture that invented Jim Crow laws, the culture that exercised discrimination against your grandparents and fought the civil rights movement and beat them in the streets when they tried to attend integrated schools, and the culture that even today perpetuates these inequitable systems. That culture lives. That's what these statues said. That culture is here. And you need to remember who you are and stay in your place. I really didn't grasp that until these protests. And so, yeah, they send a message. I've only just now heard it.
$20 bid, $20 bid, how about 10? $10 bid for the brass. It'll melt down for that.
I personally think about it a lot because maybe I just have a lot of white guilt, but I'm like, should I put this out? Is putting this out and selling it perpetuating the stereotype and making it seem like it's okay to make money off of the unfavorable depictions of other races?
10 not 20, 10 not 20.
The auctioneer is my dad.
Sold $10, buyer number 9.
My parents are founders and owners, so they brought me in to do some of the day-to-day stuff. I'll invoice out for you in just a second. A lot of our stuff comes from consigners, and a lot of other stuff comes from estate sales in the area. It's mostly old people stuff, so it's a real treasure trove for racist depictions of people.
Southwest panel ceramic lot large bowl in puppet. Or doll on a wire. With a doll and a noose. Oh, that's cute. That's cute. He looks like kind of like a squirrel. He's been holding stuff in his cheeks.
I'm always so terrified that someone's going to buy it as a joke, take it home to their family, and they're all going to have a good laugh about it, and it's going to reinforce that stereotype, and I had a hand in its history. I guess I rationalize with, I'd rather it be out in the world and people talk about it rather than just sitting forever in a box. I would love to give them to a museum, give it the appropriate context, and I don't have to worry about it anymore.
So why don't you?
Business. It's just, sometimes I really do feel like I have a responsibility to make it clear to people this is no longer okay to do, but it's not really something that's appropriate as the counter person.
Here in Richmond, we live with Confederate monuments, Confederate flags, and license plates, as well as streets and schools being named after Confederate soldiers. They're offensive because these symbols were used as tools to terrorize blacks after the Civil War to perpetuate the lie that these hateful symbols were only for the sake of celebrating heritage. I believe that nowadays we must identify and address the inappropriateness of displaying these images. I believe we are displaying subliminal consent by not addressing these items because we're basically approving of their existence. Therefore, we must be diligent in speaking up. I think that these items send blatant messages under the mantra of heritage. As it relates to other images such as print or television media, those messages can be deemed as subliminal.
I think we as a people do ignore these racially offensive things. Sometimes because we may not be as impacted as other people. Sometimes it's because we feel like we can't impact a change, either because they've been so entrenched in time and history, in place, or perhaps We feel powerless as a single individual. And sometimes it's because we don't know the truth. We're not taught the truth. And absent truth, we make up stories. We make up our own stories that help us live with certain truths. For instance, the Confederate flag was made with very deliberate intent and reason, just like the one Betsy Ross made. Each star, each stripe had a reason behind it. But with time, as we get away from the events of those days, and for whatever truth story we haven't been told or that we're running from, we begin to assign new meaning to things like the Confederate flag. And so today, there are lots of versions of why the flag exists and why people fly it. We need truth. We need one truth.
I do think that racially derogatory items are subliminal messages because they kind of perpetuate negative stereotypes, especially about people of color. You see ads like that H&M ad that happened a couple years ago where they had a young black boy in a hoodie that said "coolest monkey in the jungle," and that kind of furthers that negative stereotype that dehumanizes African Americans, with people thinking, oh, they have features that are similar to monkeys, or that they're not beautiful and things like that. And you also have that Gucci sweater that had the black face with the lips that were the old cartoonish versions of black lips. And these items, you know, either people are complicit in it or they just don't really care. And I think that there has to be some oversight to kind of take a step back and say, these items are inappropriate, these items are dehumanizing, and they're not really good for our culture.
Living here in Northern Virginia, but coming from New York, I was a little taken aback when I got here and realized that all of the major roads where I live are named after Confederate generals. So my neighborhood is right in the middle of Lee Jackson Memorial Highway and Lee Highway. And it occurred to me when I got here that I had never seen roads or major symbols that sort of celebrated the Confederacy. That's the strange thing about something you live with daily, is that you start to just not notice it. You know, I remember thinking about that when I first moved here, and then just drove on it every day and saw the signs every day or heard it mentioned every day, or it got repeated every day in my GPS. And you become so used to it, you forget about it. I think that's awfully hurtful, right? Because it normalizes the celebration of something that frankly should not be celebrated. It should be condemned. I definitely think that not addressing it gives subliminal consent. It basically says, yeah, we're okay with this. This is fine. We're fine. We're comfortable driving on roads whose names celebrate these people. We don't mind at all constantly referencing these people. And perhaps that means that they get talked about, perhaps it doesn't, but it just sort of keeps it in everybody's language and I think normalizes it. And if you don't change it, you are accepting these circumstances and saying that you're comfortable with them. I feel pretty strongly about this and have felt strongly that statues should come down. I supported a local effort recently to change the name of one of our high schools. It was renamed, Justice High School, where previously it was named Jeb Stuart High School. And there are also efforts nearby to rename other schools. all of which I think are positive, right? And you are, of course, not erasing history. History will always exist. Whether we choose to acknowledge it or not, it will be there in books, it will be there in videos. And I think you can absolutely understand and learn about the history without having major signs and symbols in our daily life, like our roads or our schools in that case. But to go back to what I was saying, I don't think it changes anything about how much we can learn about history if our roads have names that aren't celebrating this piece of history and commemorating it. I think, like I said before, I think that's pretty risky, right? Because it just normalizes it. And we can always learn about those things. I don't think they need to be part of our daily lives, which also sort of implies that they're not harmful. It implies that there's nothing wrong with them.
Well, for me, the most painful racially derogatory symbol that I see almost daily is the Confederate flag. Living in Richmond, Virginia, frankly, you can't help but see it at some point during your comings and goings almost every day, whether it's on a bumper sticker or occasionally flying by somebody's house or out their window on their lawn, what have you. I find the flag extremely offensive and hurtful for a couple of reasons, but primarily because to me it says slavery. It represents a time in my ancestors and in our people's history when other people enslaved us. They treated us like property, like commodities to be bought and sold, and then discarded once used up. So people want to fly that flag, tell me that they want to celebrate and honor that time period. Well, as we've all heard, when you know better, you do better. So while each of us can't fight every single battle, collectively, we can fight the battles that need fighting. We can do better. And as an African American, while it may not be my job to fix racism in America, because I didn't create it, we didn't create it, it is my job to speak out and speak up, and to call out injustice when and where I see it, to speak on behalf of my brothers and sisters when their voices are not heard. I believe the flag, the Confederate flag, is an injustice to Black people in America, and I think it's time that we remove that from our daily lives.
Removal of Black Americana is impossible, mainly because we have modern day versions of it. For example, Aunt Jemima was created in the late 1800s and she's still around today. She looks very different, but the concept of Aunt Jemima is still around. A lot of people who own and have Black Americana are older people, and they are beginning to relinquish these items. And these artifacts, they don't damage history, in my opinion. They don't erase history. In my opinion, these items are history because they have that historical context to them. So they do need to be preserved. And they show us a part of American history that we don't talk about. Again, the Jim Crow, as well as Reconstruction eras. And we know what happens when history is overlooked. We know what happens when history is not taught. We need these items to teach history, or we'll wind up in a generational situation similar to what we are going through today.
Removing these symbols can be easy. Take all the Confederate names and flags off of military bases. It should be easy anyway. Or it can be challenging. It requires the society to come to grips with some parts of its history and its current characteristics that we prefer to just look away from. But I do think it's possible to remove them. I don't think it erases history. I mean, in a perfect world, before the protests, I would have liked to see the statues recontextualized on Monument Avenue with museums built around them, really tell the whole story of who these people were, what they really fought for, which was the maintenance of slavery. But particularly after seeing how the protests have gone and how the statues have been recontextualized and finally taken down, I live in Midlothian. I'm an old white guy. I'm not going to tell somebody who for 150 years has been the subject of this sort of intimidation and this kind of systemic inequity that I'm not going to support them in taking down these statues, because I can't stand by while my fellow citizens are treated that way. So I don't think it erases history. That history, sadly, in a lot of ways is always going to be there. And I think it is important, that we take them down, we put them in museums, and we tell the whole story.
It's crucial that we tell our history, our collective history, in such a way that it is inclusive and authentic, that we capture and tell the untold, the undertold, and even the unheard stories that are part of our nation's history. So no, removing the symbol from being present in our everyday life doesn't erase or destroy it. Its history is told where the rest of the history is told.
I think removal of these objects is possible. But the objects and the symbols, they run deep and they run wide. And consent or support will come depending on what's at stake for each individual. And it's a conversation, though, that we need to have. We may create some divides with it, but not addressing it is not healthy either. We need context. There is a place in history and a place potentially out of public view for all these items. But it's time that we create the change that's needed.
As a parent, I have sort of dreaded the day my kids start asking the day that they start asking about the names of the roads and how they got their names, or who are those people, or why are they named that. Everything is a teachable moment. It's important for me to teach them about our history and teach them about racism in this country and the Confederacy and slavery and the origins of how we got here. But it's awfully hard to explain to a little kid why such an important thing, to them, they're just learning about getting around, why such an important thing is named after someone who did that. So I think if they were removed, then we have different opportunities. We have opportunities to put into our daily language something more powerful, rather than something, frankly, horrifying and embarrassing, to be constantly referencing or to be celebrating.
I feel like I'm back in 1968 in Alabama, practically. Things that I never thought I'd have to worry about and talk about again suddenly are there. I thought I did this. We did this already, Anyway, so my little artifacts are around here. I'd say proudly we overcame that part, but we still got to keep fighting.
Hi. How are you?
One of the first pieces that I bought is a cement black kid sitting, I guess, on a post. I had felt an instant affinity for this thing, so I bought it and I brought it home and I told the kids, and they were like, "What is that?" Because they were real little. And I said, "This is Rassus, and he's going to be the guardian angel of our house."
Don't you know?
He wants a big birthday party for 50.
It was Rastus. I don't know that it was like a member of the family necessarily.